Dr. Barabino, what does courageous and ethical action by a leader of a society governing board mean to you when the aim is gender and racial equity, diversity, and inclusion in a society and its fields? And can you share an example of when you personally took courageous action in engaging your board colleagues and senior administration or members of your society to advance these interests?
That's a broad question that could be answered many ways. And I was thinking about maybe one way to address it is that when you think about when you're tackling a really tough subject like diversity, equity, inclusion, and opinions will be all over the place, and people are at different stages of the spectrum of their understanding and their willingness to really do something significant in that space, people often go to backlash, like for fear of backlash or for fear of overinterpretation of a law or policy that kind of puts them in a place where they don't do anything. And so I think the leaders have to be courageous and ethical to say, no, that's not an excuse. You want to be understanding of potential backlash, but you don't use that as a reason not to move. You don't use that as a reason to stay inactive. So this idea of having the courage to speak up and not be tenuous. So it can't be like, oh, maybe, I think I feel okay about this. No, you have to be strong in your statement. So not being tenuous, not being afraid of backlash. And it's hard to give good examples without, dealing with things that sometimes that might be confidential. But I'm going to give an example that I think many people do recognize. And that's something like revocation of fellow status. So that's a tough one. And I have been involved in those kinds of situations. And I think it's important for the leadership to, when it's the right thing, to do it, to not like back off on, oh, I'm afraid, or someone might not like this. That I think is a concrete example of this concept of not being too afraid of backlash, doing what is the right and ethical thing to do, and being willing to stand up and have that voice that's not tenuous, that's very strong and adamant about what is just and fair.
Thank you, Dr. Barabino. Often when the question of backlash comes up, I think who's being centered in the fear of backlash, because there might always be a backlash.
Exactly.
Who's you're most concerned about. So Dr. Ware, does the fiduciary duty of a society's governing board include advancing gender and racial equity and diversion and inclusion in a society and its fields? And if so, what does that look like?
It's a good question. And I would argue yes, because I think the fiduciary responsibilities we have are really to best serve members, all members, and to really enrich their experience as scientists. And so doing work to advance gender, racial equity, and diversity and inclusion, that's part of it. And I think it's so interesting because when I've served on small society boards and larger society boards, and it's always the same. People take the financial responsibility very seriously. When they get their board book, they have their calculator, they got a cup of coffee, and they're punching it in and making sure that there isn't a penny that was over or incorrect. They read through the minutes to make sure that there isn't a comma missing. But then when it comes to DEI report, they're just like, oh, you're doing that good work. And there's no comment. And I think that's maybe where we need to take out our version in this metaphor, I guess I'll say a calculator, which is that we should all be, as board members, responsible board members, just as we take seriously our editorial skills and grammatical skills and our math skills, we should be boning up on, really trying to learn a bit more about what the best practices are for DEI. And we should be kind of challenging and evaluating the work that our society is doing on DEI for all of the aspects, for all of the committees that we're working on. I think far too often, this isn't considered to be one of the main responsibilities of boards. Boards know in general that they should be doing it, but each individual board member may not take it as a personal responsibility. And so in not doing so, I think we miss that kind of critical eye. I think with more people, if they took as seriously the work to advance gender, racial equity, what have you, as they do, if they took it as seriously as they do trying to balance the budget or what have you in these board books, I think we would, all boards would really benefit from it.
Thank you. And so again, Dr. Ware, would you consider, or would you share key levers and strategies that you have used to successfully engage board colleagues to evolve their perspectives and willingness to take meaningful action regarding gender and racial equity, diversity and inclusion for ethics and excellence in the society?
That's a tough one. I could say, again, we've had some highs and lows. I mean, like all societies, there are some things that we've tried that haven't worked and some things that have worked. And I don't know if that necessarily means it's a hard and fast rule for success. But I will say that, as you know, Dr. Barabino mentioned, as Jamie mentioned, as many people have already mentioned, not everybody is starting from the same spot. So I think that kind of top-down instructions that this is what we're doing for DEI doesn't seem to go over very well. And I think people feel a lot more engaged in the work, engaged in the process when they feel like some of it can be their own ideas, and that they can go at their own pace. If it's a glacial pace, that's not going to work, right? If someone's going to need 10 years to get on board to have a code of ethics, that wouldn't work. But really allowing people to participate, doing conversations in small groups, I think can be very helpful. And also kind of just reminding us when we're all together as a group, as a board, for a society, what the shared kind of expectations are. Bring even the most reluctant members, I think, they can start to wonder, why is it that I'm only one person that's voting against this and everybody else is voting for this? There must be some extra information I need to have. And that's where some of these kind of small conversations can be really helpful, I think, to bring people along. I don't know that you can really have a good and effective group dynamic if you have people who you feel like you're dragging along, right? So if there's people who are very reluctant and you're dragging them along, that's going to slow down the entire board's progress, but you're also going to probably create a lot of resentment among those two, one or whomever it is that you're kind of dragging along. So I think that boards are, that's maybe one of the benefits of boards having turnover, is that that you do kind of constantly have new ideas coming in. And as that dynamic, as the community changes, the dynamic can sometimes change. But I think it's really important for leaders, for presidents or people who are in leadership roles on scientific societies, to really make time for conversation and to make time to hear a variety of voices, knowing that you don't necessarily have to have the, a minority voice, like a minority opinion, maybe one lone person saying, I don't want to do DEI work. They don't necessarily have to be the one that's shaping or deciding what the entire board's going to do, but allowing them the opportunity to discuss their feelings and then hear from their peers why their peers might be feeling differently, why their peers might be voting, why the majority of the board might be voting in favor of best practices for, supporting, trans scientists or whatever the case might be that you're tackling. So I think that's something to really consider, is I think, shutting down conversation or stifling conversation when you do have one or two people that might disagree with the group doesn't seem to work very well. It just seems to build resentment. So I would say listening is very important, and making sure that people feel like they're heard, and then allow the democratic process to continue and still vote as you would normally, knowing that those one or two voices may not have the votes to necessarily decide the fate of a decision related to DEI.